Dolly for me.
Awesome. Welcome to the Holey Cow. I'm Daniel, and today we have a special guest, Cadell Last. Um, I met Cadell through his online platform, Philosophy Portal. He has kindly taken an interest in and supported my own fledgling project here, Holey Cow. And today we have some interesting ground to cover. I could introduce Cadell by his many interesting accolades and publications, but I would like to introduce him as follows. If Hegel said philosophy arrives in the night of the world, that philosophy is the reality of historical process matured into thought. And if Marx responded that such philosophers have only interpreted the world instead of changing it, which is the point. And if Zizek follows on saying, in the 20th century, inspired by Marx, we sought to change the world too quickly, but now it is time to think again, and to think deeply, intensely, and slowly. Then, my guest Cadell Last can be said to be something like a life builder by day and a world historical thinker by night. And somehow, because of the technological affordance of our world historical moment, these two seem to be coalescing at dizzying speeds. Cadell is one of a few building spaces in which we can find and realize the all-important time to think in our lives. He is perhaps one of the great attempters of whom Nietzsche spoke. So, in brief, and from the real of the 21st century, he is building a life world in the real of the century and realizing the philosophical spirit of our time. He is a thinking reflector, an owl by night, and some kind of cockle-doodle-doo by day. I'm greatly excited for this conversation, but before I introduce the terrain that we will be exploring, I have two very important questions for Cadell. First, welcome onto the Holy Cow, and thank you for your time. And we want to know, what is your morning routine, and do you deny being the confluence of an owl and a rooster?
Well, great to be here, Holy Cow, and I'm glad that the animal metaphors are so alive for you, and that they're bringing philosophy to life in an interesting way. And thank you for that introduction. Look, my morning, I've had a few people asking me about, broadly speaking, my day to day, or even asking me about my body. And I think the easiest thing to say, man, like if I can start this story at many starting points, right? Like, and depending on where I pick the starting point, the story might be different. For whatever reason, I'm gonna pick my starting point in a crisis I had in middle school. So, and this was like super emotional for me. Like when I was in middle school, I was a little overweight and I was constantly picked on. I wasn't able to make the sports teams that I wanted to make. And even my younger brother, it was I think one of the crisis moments for me was my younger brother made a sports team that I really wanted to make, and I was a year older, and it was just like a middle school version of a night of the world crisis, or midlife crisis. Anyway, long story short, I really got into fitness around this time, and that became my daily routine. And that daily routine has transformed over the years in terms of, its content. But in general, what that moment started was basically a sort of self-motivated discipline that I basically don't take a day off. So like my morning routine is pretty my life and my morning routine is a pure repetition. And I don't really make a distinction between Monday and Sunday. I don't really make a distinction between Friday and Saturday. In some ways that can happen, but like I wake up, um, I have a little meditation routine. I take a shower, I have a morning coffee, and then I'm in the books. And that's kind of my morning routine. And am I an owl and a rooster? Um, I've kind of come to identify with the owl, and that's kind of like the symbol of Philosophy Portal. And the reason why it's the symbol of philosophy portal is because I was sick of being a rooster. And and I was sick of being a rooster because I felt like my thought and my action was engaged in a reality that actually I was impotent to change. So like I was constantly trying to change a reality that actually I had no power or right to change. So I kind of went into this axiom that Zizek talks about, which is that we've spent, like you said, we've changed the world too quickly, and now is the time to take a step back and think. And I think what I've found in that process is that if you take a step back, you do have the capacity to see a space where you can make a political difference, but it's like the eye of a needle. So like I would bring in here like the Christ theological dimension, that it's like, going threading the eye of a needle. And it's like, and because it's so small and narrow, if you're not really seeing clearly, you're going to spend your life wasting your thought and your action because you're interacting with a reality that's not the eye of the needle. It's something that you have no power to change. And so I think the capacity to discern that eye of the needle is something that I think it's a perception that you gain through the cross, if I could say that. And so, theologically, I like the cross. I like the idea of the rosy cross. And then philosophically, I like the notion of the owl, in the sense that the owl is patient, the owl is perceptive, the owl is paying attention, but the owl is doing that so that it can wait for the right moment and the right time and the right place to strike.
Epic. Yeah. The Sure. So I suppose that the cross at the moment for you, the eye of the needle, is this Christian atheism course. Is what you working on, and that's where my kind of background is from, is the artwork around your course and in your course, and it's kind of in that direction that this that I want to go, that I want to explore. But I mean, just to since being on the portal, I've been it's yeah, it's definitely been an impression, your productivity. So I guess it's natural for that question of the morning routine to come from different sources as well. Um, let me so my
Here's
my yeah.
I just want to say, in terms of the productivity, this is something that my undergrad supervisor taught me, and I remember it clearly, why I repeat it sometimes, is that she told me when I was making my first CV, which is like a curriculum vitae, it's like a resume. She said, "Don't go online and look at my CV." And she said that because she knew that I would get this image in my head of how productive she was,
Hmm.
right? Because the key is, and what she was trying to tell me there, is that if you focus on the day-to-day repetition, the productivity will happen of itself. Like, the productivity is just a result of the day-to-day repetition. And if you focus on the day-to-day repetition, in 20 years, say, like, hypothetically, you focus on the day-to-day repetition, and whatever that day-to-day repetition is for you, it doesn't matter. And here's the thing, and like we talked about this in the Christian atheism course, we're in some ways doomed to repetition.
Hmm.
Like you can't help but repeat. But if you focus on that, cultivating what that repetition means for you, in 20 years' time, there's going to be some kid who's 20, 25 years old who looks at you and is like, whoa, how are you so productive? Right? So it's, in some sense, in some sense, it's a parallax shift, you know?
Hmm. Hmm. That's beautiful. I mean, like you're enacting that same gift that your supervisor him the supervisor that your supervisor gave you, and it's material. It's like this uh disabling these big other projections, or at least contextualizing them, and there's something important about that in terms of the community spirit, or the kind of space that this eye of the needle Christian atheism seems to be gesturing into. I mean, that's the heart of this interest, but the clarified heart is this we've spoken about it as subjective destitution, this existential truth process, this um and it was just the other day, actually on Monday, that you framed it, um because it's been like almost empty, this linchpin of the modification of belief, that it's important that Christianity is negated because of the way that it modifies belief. But then I've been like stumbling over the way in which it modifies belief. And your expression the other day was that it produces a qualitative change in the capacity to use the master signifiers, or the position of the big other, and so reflecting on what you just shared, it might be instantiated in that very kind of way, this kind of uh, skillful use or means with regard to the way that big other can play out in relationship between one another. So the when my yeah, this
So I just want to say very quickly
yeah.
in regards to what you're saying is I think what we're trying to do, like the Father and the Son, let's speak in terms of the Trinity. The Father and the Son are realities. Like we don't want to get rid of the Father and the Son. The Father and the Son do have a kind of hierarchical relationship. Like the Father is like they're not symmetrical, right? Like the Son is the child of the Father, and the Father is the teacher or the elder to the child. But in Holy Spirit, they're equal. That's the key. So like when you move, so like when you this qualitative change in the capacity to use the master signifier, the position of the big other, is that you're actually entering space of Holy Spirit where the Father and the Son are equal. Or we could say, like, for example, the teacher and the student, or the elder and the child, whatever relationship of hierarchical difference. We have to like spaces of hierarchical difference are necessary and they're good. If
Mm.
they get reified, they can become stale and sort of authoritarian. But also, if we avoid them and we just have a flat horizontality, then actual learning between generations can't happen. So we have to find a way to hold this difference while at the same time entering into a space of genuine equality.
Yeah, yeah, that equality and that difference, and being achieved in some way through the way that this existential truth process modifies belief, and that there's some kind of death, dying process here, that I guess part of the impulse from me is wanting to hear more of your personal experience in that process. I mean, it's a similar kind of reasoning to your singularity series on your channel. It's this the personal as being a very important theological dimension. So there's an impulse for me. I mean, is that enough of a question or a frame, or yeah.
Sure. Yeah, like I think for me, since leaving the university, keeping the personal and the universal into a feedback loop with each other is important because at the university, but I think in the structure of many institutions in general, we can sucked into a universality without the personal. I'm not sure if you've had that experience in church settings or institutional school settings yourself, but there can be a way in which the universal gets pulled away from the personal. And it's almost like we're just talking in universal abstractions, but like the personal singularities aren't there. So I think that including that relationship between the universal and the personal singularity hopefully enriches both, meaning that the universality gets richer and the singularity gets richer, which is kind of the gesture there, or at least the motivating idea from from the Singularity series. But in terms of like me getting into my own personal story, maybe you could prompt me in a direction that is most alive for you.
There's there's this, well, that university reflection, and I know that's part of your biography, like um, you had to reconfigure that relationship with the university, and it I heard you share that it was at the end of your doctorate research, I think, that the beginnings of a philosophical spirit truly were seeded, as that material took you to the question of philosophy, and then that involved some kind of um, deliberation, and then essentially where you are now being in some way outside of the institutional frame, and even the traditional university frame. So even you said there's something about that affords exactly what you're saying about the kind of personal encounter that 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 has a strangeness, a liveness that the institution almost structurally prevents. It prevents, or it safeguards against that. And it's around this mediation of what it's just been speaking about as say the the big other. So if I have in mind the what you seeded in terms of younger brother, your younger brother earlier, but the let me try and if so a difference, maybe a difference. I've I've in this process come to identify with Christianity and to speak from that position. But a difference that has been generative between us is that you resonate with and have found deep truth in this existential truth process, the metaphysics inscribed by Christianity, but you haven't felt the need to identify with Christianity, and sometimes um, feeling that that's probably been to your benefit because of the way that the use of the signifier can pull you in. So it affords you to Holy Spirit in that Sisychian sense. So the question, there's these there's these there's these moments of this destitution that you've experienced, your that sporting moment with your brother, the moment in the after the institution, after the university, and these are all kind of like instantiations of this kind of grammar. But then there's this point of the shifting. It shifts from something like a content to a qualitative change. So the transcendental illusion of the big other and the necessity of that to the process of growth and development is kept, but the change is something uh, qualitative. So in a sense, you can't pin down subjective destitution as this or that event. But the peculiarity and the difference is the signifier of Jesus and the positioning in relationship to it. So if that does that help a needle, like is there a direction that you can feel there, or that yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, I can maybe we need to search around a bit more for a specific personal entry. But
Mm,
in terms of what you're pointing towards there with the quantity and the quality, I'm totally there with you in terms of I think that the general form that we're looking at here is the buildup of some quantity. The content of the quantity can be anything, like it can be dedication to sport, it can be a dedication to certain knowledge practice, it can be a certain, you fill in the X, whatever it is for you, if you're a musician or whatever. Usually the buildup of that quantity is actually progressing in relationship to an ideal figure of the big other. Like, for example, with sport, I had a certain baseball player that I was idolizing. Or in science, I had a certain scientific figure that I was idolizing. So there's some figure of the big other that appears there. and then that buildup of content occurs and in some sense necessarily fails, which is kind of the moment of the subjective which is kind of the moment of the subjective destitution. And it's kind of what do you do with that moment of subjective destitution, right? Like some people in that moment of subjective destitution just fall into nihilism, or they just fall into a kind of they recoil away from the world, or they give up on the world, or they think that because they were burned, they shouldn't try, as it were, to re-engage that passion or that desire. Think about, for example, a guy who suffers his first breakup, right? In many ways, you build up a certain content with another person, someone you love, someone that you have a libidinal, affectionate connection to, and then she says, "I'm done with you." And then there's this moment of subjective destitution, there's this moment of collapse. And I remember the first time a woman that I wanted to be with broke up with me. And I remember thinking, I've lost this entire history. I've lost this entire content. Um, and there is this feeling of why start again? Why do it again? Right? And so there is this question, there's this buildup of a certain content, and there's the failure of that content. And then there's this question of what do you do with that moment of failure? What do you do with that moment of destitution? Which I do think that the dialectical structure of the Trinity actually does help us think.
Uh, awesome. So the I'm thinking about this. I mean, the historical momentum and buildup of content around the signifier Jesus and Christ, and so then, and this is very much what I take the course to be wrestling with. It's this, it's what to do with that. So how do you, given what you've said, like how do you, and now it's like this theoretical, well, historical level, but then in terms of your personal enactment, like how do you relate to that buildup of content? If, if that's the like site of contestation, or that's where the destitution is asked or is happening.
Well, when you're young, it's a catastrophe. I mean, in principle, at any time it can be a catastrophe, right? So I don't want to say like so here's like one way you could take it is like certainly when I was a teenager, I was less reflective than now in my late 30s. So there is a qualitative difference in terms of my capacity to reflect on myself just because of the sheer repetition of experience. Like you experience enough repetitions over the difference between 18 years old and 38 years old, and there is a difference there just in terms of sheer just brute experience. So there's that to be said. When you're a teenager, you just have to experience the catastrophe, it seems. And there doesn't seem to be a big other in terms of there seems to be a brutal contingency in terms of how an individual experiences and deals with that catastrophe. Like, for example, the difference between the way me and my brother responded to the first time our girlfriend broke up with us. Like the way I responded to a girlfriend breaking up with me and the way my brother responded to a girlfriend breaking up with him was different. And why, like, how to account for that difference? Um, it, I don't have any easy answers there. Like, and there doesn't like even for example, like with me trying to be a big other to my brother in that situation, there doesn't seem to be much one can do to like one can be there. Like it seems like that's possible. Like one can simply be there in the catastrophe. Like, but in terms of like offering like moral or ethical advice or like, cheer up, like just like all these empty platitudes. like these empty signifiers of like that doesn't seem to have any function or effect, it seems to me in my experience. Like there seems to be something super difficult, but at the same time super powerful and just simply being there. Like even in like my conversation with Zizek on Christian atheism, there was a moment where he was saying, all that I mean by Christian atheist is like you're in like you're at the end of your life, like you're at the end of your path, and just simply be with me and don't fall asleep. Like be with me and don't fall asleep. Like and that like to me was really powerful because like when my grandfather passed away, he had a heart attack and they brought him back to life. He had actually a near-death experience. And then they brought him back to life and he had an extra week of life where he was just basically a withering corpse. Like he
Mm.
was just even like seeing ghosts and spirits and stuff.
Yeah.
And and I was just by his side and just be with like that's it. Like it's just and how hard is that? And it's to be. I'm reminded of the passage from the Phenomenology of Spirit where Hegel says, um, to be with and tarry with death is requires the most powerful spirit. So it's kind of I guess that's the direction is like I guess that to me might account for the difference in how one responds in those moments of subjective destitution to the is like your capacity to be with it as opposed to, for example, covering it up with you fill in the blank, alcoholism, um, junk food, binge watching TV, whatever.
Mm. This the impossibility of death or of thinking it, of relating to it. It's been one of the things that has been said to you around the Christian atheism course is this um the wave that you paused at the death or like you paused at Christ and at the death of it and the knee-jerk reaction almost was like, yeah, but what about the resurrection? And there's this tendency to try and smear get over quickly or try and whereas like the impossibility of death and the you gave me this framing in our conversation of like your impotence really with regard to being with another in the face of death is I mean, it's impossible. It's a stumbling stone. But then it's that Zizek's like and yet it moves. Something repeats. Something goes on and then it's like what to do in in how you shared now. Do you see this philosophical spirit that's holding the tension of Christian atheism as in some way well, the word that just came to the mind was like midwife or like attending to Christianity specifically. Um, is that would you take that framing or
Not only would I take that framing, but that framing actually has an intimate connection to my history. So, first, I want to say that I actually had a conversation recently with an evangelical Protestant individual who was actually self-criticizing his own experience within evangelical Christianity as too much of a resurrection focus without the crucifixion. So I just want to emphasize, like, this has been a recurring theme and it does hurt me a little bit, like not in like a deep way, but like it does like it hurts a bit in the sense that like when people say Christian atheism's focusing too much on the crucifixion and not enough on the resurrection. But in some sense, it's offering, I think, a very important corrective, which is that you actually don't get the resurrection without the crucifixion. So if you too quickly do the crucifixion, like kind of you get a cheap resurrection. Like I'm trying to say here, like it can be even as trite and as simple as like, when people say work hard, play hard. Like I'm trying to emphasize like you better work hard. And like I'm not saying don't play hard, Like we can work, we can play, we can crucify, we can resurrect, but don't just jump over the work, and don't think like, oh, the work is just gonna be a walk in the park or a cakewalk. It's not. Like, and I think that's like to me, like the important point is like, and I actually get a little upset at what I would call cultural Christians or liberal Christians who think like Christianity is like a re-enchanting magical oh, just come into the Christian identity and then you'll have it. Like I think that's just not it. Like in the sense, and more importantly, it doesn't really understand the moment because I think that the reignited interest and need for religion is actually a deeply, like, to me as someone who comes from an atheist secular background, it's like, oh, something's really wrong. Like I just had a conversation with someone who was more in the political sphere, and he was talking about how because like basically we're going through an empire dissolution moment, um, that it's of course like I referenced in the course, it's kind of similar to the decline of Rome, the Roman Empire. That actually like we're in a period of decay, we're in a period of decline in a way, and there's the possibility for rebirth, but actually this moment is like a crucifixion moment. Like we're like our civilization is going through a crucifixion moment. There's a negativity moment that we're going through. And that's important. So like in terms of your question about the midwife and the attending and the Christian atheism and the philosophical spirit holding that tension. The way I see myself as a philosopher, as my whole philosophical journey since it started, is as a midwife. And it's the midwife position, which is that it's the baby isn't born yet. The baby is not born yet. The baby is we're in the arduous labor moment. Like the waters broke. The waters broke. It's the waters broke and the woman's crying and the woman's screaming and there's a lot of pain and the head's too big and the canal's too small and we've got to push. Like that's the moment we're in. So and philosophically speaking, that's important because Socrates called the philosopher literally the midwife of the concept. So the idea that we what philosophy is doing, and philosophy at its most interesting to me, is in this position of the midwife of the concept. And it's dirty and it's messy and it's the opposite of the institutional clean analytic approach. It's it's actually in the mess of life and in the real of life. And I think Christian atheism here is an interesting concept to hold that moment.
Yeah, yeah, big agreements. The there's a potential for a segue into the subtle body material, which I'll probably need your help with, and I'm also wanting to draw on your own experience around that concept related to our themes. But I wanted to this the the premature or the aborting the death process, this looking away from the dying, and like whatever residue is left there is carried on into the whatever's resurrected, and it's like this zombified. Uh, yeah, I can share a dream that I had when I was converting. Like this, um, I woke up the one morning and there was there was this taste and the smell of the word that I came to for it was insipid, and then another word was like putrid or flesh, and the image was like a chunk of flesh nailed to a billboard, and it was just like this flash and this experience around the nostrils and the mouth, and then I woke up. And I started to realize this dimension of within Christianity, the sense of like a corpse bride. Like there's something about a flesh that is being preserved that hasn't been allowed to die. That and a word that now this is like 4 or 5 months on, a word that your course has given me to that has captured that sense of what that flesh was, or the way in which it was being related to was fetish, like fetishized flesh. That's been the most appropriate way to capture what um, what that is or what that was, and yeah, I'm seeing it playing out. Just to express the immense gift that has been for myself in terms of the reinterpretation of that dream at a really pivotal moment, and part of that decision to step into the Christian identification, knowing that in some way, like there's something nasty like hiding here, and it's around this attendance of the death of the crucifixion, and that like that crucifixion applies to you, to your flesh as the Christian. That's the so what that's why you're that's why it's a bold position for you to see the depth of that existential truth process and not need the identification or the being in. And in fact, in what you shared, it's actually there's this deep service. There's a deep service in that because it returns the attention to the fact of that, to the to the uh, to the messiness of that dying process, and the encouragement to like no, not just yet. Like I mean, Jesus was the one. I mean, the way that I think about his authority in a spiritual sense is that he like bottomed out. It's the bottoming out that authorizes him. He's an authority because he bottomed out. Like he really went down, and like that. It's that it's also a special revelation within the tradition of the nature of God, like that he's like that. That when he comes, he goes to like the destitute. It's a different nature. Ah, the do so
Oh, there's
I
a lot to say there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I'm actually writing an article at the moment about perversion, and one of the things that I'm reflecting on at the moment is in psychoanalysis is actually there's a structural unity between neurosis and perversion. Freud says Freud says that, and this is super relevant to Christianity and the things that you're talking about here, is that Freud says neurosis is the negative of perversion. And what he means by that is that the pervert is positively clinging to a fetish, which the neurotic is repressing. So, in the context of what you're talking about with the corpse bride and the fetishization of Christianity, this is in some sense what I'm critiquing in the liberal Christian. Because the liberal Christian, they think they identify with Christ and they think it's like a positive identification. But it's no, it's your hands are nailed to the cross, motherfucker. Like you're nailed to a cross. Like it's not this, you know what I mean? Like it's this difference between pot like it's and the most ridiculous displays of it in liberal Christianity is when people like of course in like rap it's probably the worst where they have like a big chain with a cross like a big gold chain or even just like dressing it up aesthetically. Like you're going to a dance party or like you're going to or like it's just this fetishistic external performance, and like I think like that's yeah, I mean it's totally inverted. Like the structure is totally inverted there to me. So it's if Christianity, what I'm trying to say is if Christianity comes to you, like as it kind of the symbols of Christianity came to me in a way, it's like it's actually it's a beautiful moment. There's something beautiful about it, but it's a dark moment too, right? It's not this it's gonna deeply undermine your liberal sensibilities in a way. What's coming to my mind also is Actually, someone who will be giving a guest lecture in the course next week, Barry Taylor, who's a theologian at GCAS, where he says religion is most interesting where you least expect to find it. And I think that's so true. Like, and to me, like that's so alive for me is like there's all of these ways in which you can find if you're paying attention and you're not overly identified with the explicit identification, you can actually find religion where it seems like it's not there, but it is there. Like so, let me give you an example of again this conversation I just had with a political theorist. He was talking to me about the secular left politics, and he was telling me about what the secular left politics values and like what he did and like how he's living. And he said that we're with Muslim communities and we're trying to fight for the rights of Muslim communities. And we are interested in planetary concerns about the way the global south will be affected by global warming, and so on. And he was saying that from the perspective of someone who was raised Christian but had left Christianity. But then I said to him, but everything you're describing to me is like the radical core of Christianity. You're with the other, like you're loving the neighbor because the Muslim is you're not Muslim, but you're loving the Muslim and you're defending the Muslim, but you're not Muslim. And you're caring about the global south, but you're not in the global south. And you know what I mean? Like there's this radical disposition to sacrifice oneself for the other. But he was doing that as if he wasn't Christian. But I was like, maybe when you stopped identifying as a Christian, you actually were Christian. You know, like there's this weird thing, you know, like and I think I'm trying to point at that.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. It's I mean, just to pick up on that last point, there's a lot there to that I'd love to get into, but that because it's this difference. Like, so if I speak from say the perspective of the elders in my church, it's like this that kind of enactment, this Christianity outside of Christianity that in that imitative sense is more Christ-like often than the Christianity within Christianity because it takes the imitation. I imagine him saying something to the effect of like there's a way in which inevitably because that activity will refer to the identity of the one who's carrying it out, that it's motivated by this like a do good almost like uh the goodness is conferred on him. So the reaction that I'm assuming would come from the church elder would be that it's the point is for the goodness to go to Jesus. I'm wondering. I think Alex Ebert wrote something around this kind of dynamic as well in the preparation for the course. I mean, I'm wondering on your thoughts around that because it has to do with this kind of positioning in relation to the signifier.
Could you clarify for me the church elders position on the point of for goodness to go to Jesus? What does that mean?
Okay, okay. This um so he'll forgive me for misrepresenting, but I'll do my best. The it's something like um it gets to this faith and works thing. So just on the side, there's a danger that you were pointing out was the way in which a perverted, a neurotic Christianity could it's almost perfect in terms of removing consideration to real like concrete conditions. So you can ignore the political, economic considerations and be buffered in within your faith. His reaction might be something like the one who's imitating it's in the nature of imitation. He's imitating, he's being like Christ. Inevitability because he's Christian, but he's in some way not the relationship to the motivation. So he could be doing it for the motivation that he in some way gets salvation. Like it could just be the deferred object means of salvation, where the Christian message would be like that it's a or like the heavily Protestant Luther inflection would be that you can't do anything like it like you get the first thing sorted first and then you move from there. Does that make it clearer?
Uh, in terms of the motivation, he's doing it for salvation. Is that in regards to the example I was giving of the secular leftist?
Yes, he's doing good works. Yeah, yeah. I think so. Yeah.
I think that from my experience of the secular left, they're acting out an unconscious Christianity that has transposed salvation into an emancipatory political project. And I think that that structure needs to be questioned. That's an unconscious Christian structure there. And that actually came out in the conversation that I was referencing with him because he was saying that what structured the secular leftist politics was a subjective disposition of anger. So there's anger, like there's this unmediated anger that's there. And then I said to him as a response, I said, the interesting thing about Christ is that when he's on the cross, he's not angry. Like you know what I mean? He has every reason to be angry. So the crucial thing is, and also I've had that he brought this up as well, is like, it's not that Christ never gets angry. Like he is strategically angry at certain moments, like flipping over a table in a certain moment and stuff like this. But when it's in the moment of subjective destitution, he's not angry. And he's also not aware of salvation. He's not aware of it. He's not. The thing is with salvation and resurrection, we shouldn't give it any positive content that we know. Like we shouldn't presuppose that we know about resurrection and salvation. Because if we presuppose that we know it, we're just filling it up with content that is coming from a subjective position which is not saved. So like, how could you know? Like, there should be a radical uncertainty there, I think. A radical suspension and like a radical skepticism of being sold a certain vision of salvation. So and then, in terms of, I don't know how that relates to what you were saying about the Christian elders. So maybe you could go off of that.
That was beautiful. Thank you. It took it in the beautiful direction. So there's the the transposed emancipatory project within the political body as being an unconscious Christianity in the left. Does that piece? I want to pick that up in terms of subtle body process.
Yes.
But yeah.
So yes. Like I think that in terms of Marxism, in terms of emancipatory leftist politics, there's an unconscious Christian metaphysical structure there that we need to think about. On regards to the right-leaning Christian identification, to me, it's too directly identified in the sense that it doesn't make room for the actual functioning of the unconscious. Like the thing with the unconscious, and hopefully I can be very clear about this, is that when you think from a psychoanalytic perspective, you become a little skeptical of conscious identification.
Mhm.
Because the thing about the unconscious, like the question is, so say someone, okay, let me give a ridiculous example. Like, say someone's identifying as a Catholic priest. Like, that's my identity, right? But then the unconscious is obsessed with sex with little boys or something like that. To give like a ridiculous, gross example. The point is that we have to be aware of the unconscious identification. So the question for psychoanalysis, the question for Christians is, can we actually reconcile ourselves with the unconscious identification? Because that's where the crucifixion moment lies.
That's it's So like I read something from Simone Weil a long time ago, and it's like it's puzzled my understanding consistently, and it has to do with the sacrifice that Christ makes, which was in the vein of what you were saying just before, that he's not doing it out of the vision of salvation. So it's this necessity of it being contentless in order for it to be crucifixion. Then you have the martyr who, in the name of Christ, gives up their life. So it's what I think what Simone Weil was speaking to was like the almost impossibility of the martyr who does it in the name of Christ as being able to affect that nature of a sacrifice, essentially. Because it's I mean there's ways to nuance that, but because it's done for the sake of it. It has the sense of the glory that, but to maybe return there, but to get to this to the right and the repressed, and I mean that's been the most it's been such a guiding light when I'm looking to elders, and I recognize because the repressed returns, and it can like flashes in the face, or there's a certain enjoyment and a certain antagonism, and then often around this dynamic of us and them, like who's within and who's without. And then when that gets colored onto like the other, or the other who is deserving on some kind of violence, or and the justification, then there's like then there's something disturbing, or there's something that's not
But
quite
this is
being.
absolutely anti-Christ-like.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's the whole point. Like the whole point of Christ to me is that the whole us versus them dynamic, where the enemy deserves violence,
Mm,
that's what Christ undoes as a symbol.
yeah.
Like that's what it's like to me. It's about like the zero level is there's an enemy obstacle which we enjoy. We enjoy to hate the other, and we enjoy to inflict our violence on the other. Right? Like that's in us. And we inherit that from our tribal dynamics. And it makes sense. It makes sense evolutionarily. That's our evolutionary conditioning. And it's even, it's wired into us irrespective of race, ethnicity, culture, politics. We all do this. And so what Christ does as a symbol is he takes on that violence. It's an inwardizing process of taking that us versus them dynamic and then not even being bitter or resentful or angry about that. Because what is the most natural thing to do? It would be to be bitter, resentful, and angry about that.
Yeah, that internalization. I mean, there's still this recurrence of this theme. I mean, I'm just kind of leaning on the way that Alex Ebert framed it in terms of the atheist who imitates Christ, but there's something in. I mean, there's a way in which you honor that imitation, but then I guess, and maybe this is where more skill can come in my use. It's like I'm thinking about the relation to that 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 signifier. So it's what you said about liberating that unconscious project of Christianity. I guess I'm wondering what that means, and I have to think about it in terms of the way the signifier is used or identified with, or um. But there's a because it's this internalization, and I'm reading that as being necessary for Holy Spirit. Is that when you get individuals who are relating in that way, that there's this real um sublation, or this this not putting on the other that violent movement, or like that community spirit will grow, or is worth cultivating, or is this potential that is here in the modification of belief that this process affords. But I'm stumbling around this the signifier itself as the content that is the accumulation that affords this moment. Um, yeah, like the role that signifier plays. So maybe you shared that you came to the symbol, or the symbolism of Christianity at a certain point, and it wasn't necessarily it's not this positive experiential thing that Murphy is pointing to. It was something quite different.
Oh, no, I'm actually mobilizing Mark Gerard Murphy's work as I think he's pointing in the right direction with The Dark Night of the Soul. Like I think I was using Mark Gerard Murphy's work as a counterpoint to some other liberal Christians who I see as sort of painting this idea that Christianity is like this magical reenchantment moment. But I think that it's more like the dark night of the soul or the night of the world that is at least my experience. So, I think that to give the psych like I'll go into the personal dimensions of how the symbols of Christianity came to me, but I want to preface that by saying that I really think that where I was deeply indebted and a student of psychoanalysis is that really a lot of our psychological tensions are around the father and the mother and all of those familial dynamics. But at the same time, those familial dynamics and the role of the father and the mother, they get transposed onto figures outside of the family, right? Like the professor can play the role of a father, or even a girlfriend can play the role of a substitute mother, right? And those are dynamics we have to be very careful about. We have to be very aware of how that can happen. So, for me, at my coming to the importance of Christianity was really in relationship to the the big other of the university structure and realizing that the content I had built up, right? Like the content I had built up was in relationship to that figure of the big other. And realizing my own failure in relationship to that position and feeling the lack of that, feeling the subjective destitution in that on the level of the father. In terms of the mother, it was much more in relationship to my repetitive failure with monogamy. And my first failures with monogamy were being on, let's say, the being broken up with, right? Like basically the other or the woman saying not you, and then oscillating into a pure multiplicity, which was to say, okay, if if when I sacrifice myself for the one, she rejects me, then I'll just go into the multiplicity and I won't attach to anything, right? And then discovering Satan in the sense of betrayal, in the sense of pain, in the sense of enjoying the other's pain, in the sense of lying, in the sense of cheating, in the sense of stealing, in the sense of just doing whatever the F I want, right? And then you find Satan in yourself. So, those are the experiences that led me to Christianity as a resource to make sense of what I was going through and to reconcile myself with the big other and to reconcile myself with, let's say, sexual difference in women and children and the realities there. And to be more concrete, I did a spiritual search. Like, I didn't find those resources in Buddhism. I didn't find those resources. I didn't find those resources elsewhere. Um, Philosophy and psychoanalysis were helpful, but in terms of theology, I didn't find those resources in Islam. I didn't find so again, there's something that I found in the Trinitarian dialectic that seemed to me to point towards helping me make sense of what I was going through with, let's say, the patriarchal structure of society and as well as my relationship to women and children in that society.
Yeah, thank you for sharing like that. Like, the it's I'm tracking you in two ways. There's this and so just on the peripheral, I mean, this Hegelian notion of like a determinate negation that what is the thing that is negated constitutes like what a thing isn't is important about what the thing is. So like what is taken away is important. It's determinate. It determines what arises out of it. So you're gesturing towards this the importance of uh the unique inheritance within Christianity and that being negated in some way by atheism. The the because I'm seeing like your personal story. Yeah,
There's a form, I think there's a form of atheism which could not have existed had it not been for Christianity. And I
yeah.
think atheism doesn't recognize that. So like there's two sides of it. Like the way I was presenting it in a recent conversation is that Christianity is the father and atheism is the son. And the son, the atheism as the son, it's kind of like the teenager rebelling against dad and like leaving the house and saying, I don't want anything to do with you, dad.
Mm,
And then Christianity as the father is kind of in relationship to atheism is kind of like, no, I'm the authority, I'm the transcendental guarantee. You have to be under my house and you have to be under my rules,
mm,
right? And so I see that playing out in our society.
yeah. This the theological preconditions for and like you there's this term that I'm hearing at the portal of the theo-political economy as being an increasingly important way to think uh, whatever's happening. The the there's your personal content that you've relayed in terms of that relationship to the father and that being played out in the institutional dynamic with the university and then the big other through the mother as being through the attempts at monogamy at that process. And then you're involved in the philosophy portal project. I'm still holding at the side some stuff about the subtle body process that involve breath and speaking, and you're creating space for free speech and the role that that has in the subtle body process. But in terms of this, there's the way the mother comes to be the other girlfriend whom there's the attempts for monogamy with and the failure and the processing that. Then there's your work with the portal and this course, Christian atheism, which is in some way recognizing the world historical content as being within this signifier essentially in Jesus. It's within like the built up content is in that institution, in the institution of Christianity and in its unfolding, like the affordance out of Christianity of atheism. So the built up content when you're thinking theoretically at a world historical lens is in Christianity. So I'm wondering how well, I mean, we are experiencing you playing this out, but I'm like wondering in the way in which you uh, relating those two together. This
The way I'm specifically relating,
the personal content, so the
yeah,
personal the personal
yeah,
reliance on this trinitarian dialectic, and then the like societal or world historic content as being uh Christian to shorthand.
sure. Well, I suppose on the personal side of things, on the personal side of things, so like people say, like say, so go back to like the idea of people saying that I'm focusing too much on the crucifixion and not enough on the resurrection idea. But on the personal side of things, I think that when you move from the crucifixion to the resurrection, the content of the resurrection from a Christian atheist perspective is, let's say, the community belief or the community dynamics that have no transcendental guarantee. And I think to get very self-reflective about it, I actually think that's where my focus and my subjectivity is. So like my actual focus and subjectivity in terms of building the portal is kind of building a community without transcendental guarantee. That's what I think the portal is, but I don't think it's only the portal. And that's why I make the distinction between the community and the network. Because the community of the portal, which is an important part of it, it has to interface with a network of other projects that are doing similar like things. And then the question is, can those communities, can there be pathways of transference? And can there be pathways of connectivity between those communities? And that to me would be my where I am currently thinking is the highest order of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit would be that network dynamic of those communities. And then that would be the way to defend against the possibility of enemy opposite dynamics, where we turn another community into an enemy, potentially, right? So like we have to be aware of that. So I would say that the reason why the reason why my personal content has relevance for the universal content, or where my personal content is at play in the universal content, is that I actually think the process that I've been through is worth teaching because I think it can help other guys or can help other people in general to also go through that cross moment in a reflexive way. And then the point of going through that cross moment in a reflexive way is to basically be in service to a community or a network and to be the type of subjectivity that can do that. Right? In now the crucial thing is I'd like that to hold individuation in the sense that individuation is like, owning your own historical path, and whatever the content is of your historical path that is relevant to you, right? Like we all have different contexts. Like I grew up in Canada in a secular household. You grew up in South Africa in a different cultural milieu. And there's a different historical reality that you're dealing with and tarrying with, which has to be true to your path, right? And only you can make that your own, right? So that in terms of the world historical content, what increasingly I'm motivated by is the idea internal to Christianity of the triangle of triangles. So there's not only the triangle, but there's the triangle of triangles, which I think the history of Christianity has been trying to work through. And the actual history of Christianity is that triangle of triangles. So what does that mean? I tried to present on that. This is Hegel's idea. So the idea is that you have the Trinity in Christianity. Now, and some people have said, oh, but you can find triangles in other religions. But that's not deep enough to me because I'd say you can find abstract Trinity representations in other religions, but only in Christianity do you see the abstract Trinity built into the concrete structure of the history of Christianity itself. And then like my concrete example with that would be Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism. So with Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism, that triangle of triangles has itself been a tension that's played out. And so like where I would see it is that Orthodoxy finds itself on the level of the Father, Catholicism finds itself on the level of the Son, and Protestantism finds itself on the level of the Holy Spirit. And ultimately, what that opens up to is the idea of the invisible church. And the invisible church for on the and so people say like and people will say that's the negative side of Protestantism, that it divides itself, like it splits itself into many different denominations very easily. But I think that's its power. I think its power is that it can split itself up and somehow remain Protestantism, and that it actually opens up into what we call contemporary secular culture, and that could be the invisible church, where of course we see perversion, we see all sorts of mental health issues, where we see all sorts of crises of the individual modern postmodern subject. But that's precisely where Christians should be today. We should be with the people who are perceived as the other, right? Like and I think something could come from that. I think something could come from that. So hopefully that answers the relationship between the personal and the intellectual. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd want to dig around with there. But
that
it could be connected to the subtle body because I'm saying like we should be with the other, the pervert, the person on the outside.
yes, yes. I mean that reply was, it was rich. Like that, so maybe like a productive, to go into the portal a bit. Um, in this context, the so I'll share like an anecdote of my experience. And on a side, like this, the sense of the unique, the uniqueness about the Trinitarian doctrine within Christianity is that it has historical, concrete unfolding. There's something, and I mean, and civilizational consequence. So, because I mean, where before I converted, it was it was a Trinitarian doctrine that was most facilitating my understanding or helping me uh, move, and that's coming from a Kashmir Shaivism side. There's there's a It afforded a re-entrance into Christianity that I don't think I would have been able to make sense of without that gift. But there's something in the Trinity that changed. There's there's a the anecdote. It's like the portal space. You've got the four different spaces. You've got the edge, the thought lab, real talk, and the concept cave. And it's these different framings of the kind of speech that is going to unfold. And I heard in a conversation, also a way that I'm reading your work is you're honoring this discovery of Freud of the value of free association and free speech and unsystematized and uncensored, and that the very much the task today is creating spaces in which that can happen, that can unfold. And then I'm reading the portal through this intention. Um, so then, I mean, to ground that in like my own reflection and experience, it's a so just the other week, something happens, and I'm called to speak, and in speaking, like in the utterance to the other within that context, it something shifts in me, and it's like a trembling experience. Also, it's like it prompts the spontaneous breathing process, like a shake, a tremor that like a uh, I'm familiar with it, with breath work, so I'm with it. But the thing that called that was this being called to speech with the other in a particular way contained within the portal. So then the dynamic in which, or the place in which this is unfolding is speaking with the other, or coming to speech, and like the the way that I think that is this there's there's this exposure and loss, and then I like go to the language of like purification, and something for me that seems to be the unique affordance is the locating this dynamic within the relational context, and that exemplified by the coming to speak with the other, like coming to speech. Uh, this I don't know if that reflection is, even if it's just a reflection on an individual's experience of your work, but I'm wanting to in some way, because my fantasy is that there's this emerging uh subtle body process arising internally from the Christian context, where have certain standards or criteria that I want to use to think about that subtle body process. So, for instance, the liberal who's acting out the unconscious Christianity is some kind of gesture of this towards the other, but there's something that isn't configured. That means that the enactment doesn't liberate them. It like locks them into some program. That's why I found myself like gesturing to the body or the flesh so much. Um, and maybe even like the impulse behind this is like the sense that there's So, and it's a characteristic kind of shorthand, East and West, and it came out in the conversation with Mark Murphy, like this irony that the Eastern traditions have these deep embodied mappings and processes and practices, and then somehow there's this void within the Christian or the Western context, and even this like cultural moment of trying to reckon with this problem that gets talked about as disembodiment, and um, the yeah, so I mean, this is getting to the point where I'm there's material here that I'm trying to figure, and it's coming through this way in which the network capacity that you've been developing at the portal has disposed my subjectivity and afforded the relationship with my immediate community of church and family, and yeah, there's a lot there. Thank you for that opportunity to try and like give it to freely give speech to and associate and to unsystematically give, and I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious what's there.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to make sense of. So maybe we need to walk slowly. What's coming to my mind from your speech there is the concern with locking the other into a program. Um, and a speech that doesn't actually liberate the other. There's a desire to liberate the other. So like let me start with that is that Freud Freud was very critical of subjectivity that wanted to heal the other, right? And I think what I've experienced in different spiritual circles is I've seen that the people who want to be healers are themselves are they're not the right people to be healers. It's kind of like the same paradox in politics with power. Like the people who want the power shouldn't be the ones who get the power, which is the whole problem with the political system. Not saying we can solve that problem, but that seems to be like a constitutive issue. And I would say the same thing in the spiritual circles, that it's a constitutive issue that spiritual circles are filled with people who are talking about ego death, but they're narcissistic, right? Or like people who want to heal, but they're the ones who need to be healed, right? So like I think a key thing here, and like the paradox for like, for example, building a community or a network, is that the best people at building a community or a network don't need the community or the network. And the people who need the community in the network, they can't build the community in the network, right? So there's all these ironies, right? Like it's super like we have like I would say like we have to be aware of these dialectical inversions and these weird reversals which have to do with the concreteness of the unconscious, right? Like again, the you give examples like in the modern of in like academia like of a philosophy professor who teaches Nietzsche who himself is just institutional subjectivity, right? Like Nietzsche would hate that. Like Nietzsche left. Like Nietzsche's in the mountains, bro. Like, you know what I mean? So or like the medical doctor who's overweight telling you to fix your diet, or the marriage counselor who's divorced who's telling you how you should how to build a good long-term relationship. All of these things are we should be aware of these weird reversals. They appear structurally in religion, like the Christian who wants to save the other, right? Or the Christian who sees the atheist or sees the secular or sees the liberal and just wishes they would come to Christ, right? Like in some ways, and this came up in the portal, I think last week, where really, the person who is working with this, I gave the distinction between the phallic jouissance and the feminine jouissance, where the phallic jouissance is proselytizing, and the phallic jouissance, I see it as structurally similar to the pickup artist, Like in the same way that a pickup artist would go and get different women's numbers on the street, right? Like the process, like the person who's going around, giving out Bibles and say, come to the church, right? It's like doing a cat. It's like doing a pickup artistry, right? But like I think the feminine jouissance is much more about building something beautiful and waiting to see who comes. And I think that and the main response when I gave out that distinction was that that would take a lot of faith. But I think that that's exactly true. I think it does require a lot of faith to take that disposition. I'll tell a personal story here that I was always skeptical of people telling me what God I should believe in or how to believe in God before I had any sort of relationship to religion. I was like always fundamentally skeptical of that. And I learned in a moment of a what I would call a transcendental experience that I had this moment of a sort of, let's say, a revelation of God, where the only thing that I was told in that moment was just I had this like wordless presence of here I am, you've been looking for me, here I am. And but the crucial thing about that moment was that I didn't need to tell anyone. And more interestingly, I don't need other people to believe it happened. Like if I say that story to you and you're like, I don't believe that, you're just talking nonsense. You know what I mean? Like I don't like it, it doesn't work like that. So the crucial thing is that the belief is in some sense autonomous and self-sustaining in the sense that it doesn't depend on the other for my belief. Like if the crucial thing is if the other's disbelief threatens your belief, then it's not your belief. It's this is
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure. The the I believe you. Okay, okay. So yeah, the saving the other. There's something here because the way that I've been thinking, the a uniqueness of the affordance is the way in which it's the community of belief. So there's something about and I really appreciate that the ironies and the paradoxes around the the one who needs community is not going to be able to build it, and the community leader is going to be the one who uh, doesn't need it. And there's
and you
something.
don't want if you're in a community where the person who's leading it needs community, that's probably going to turn into an unhealthy dynamic because they need you there.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
don't want that. You don't.
I guess that plays out also like in a spiritual place where it's like this the teacher student, the way that our culture is handling this teacher student relationship. It's like the congregation and the one who professes, and then it's a and this is what's been so freeing about the portal space is the way it's contentless almost in that sense, and that these are the very dynamics that come into reflection. So when I was reflecting on this somatic process that it initiated, it had to do with like a small thing, like just a little unconscious thing from me, like maybe even like a comment or something, and then it just revealed this dynamic in myself, and there was like a trembling of that exposure, and then it compelled this moment of metabolizing that material surfacing, but it was afforded within the space of speech. So a specific configuring of speech. So the tension or the paradox that I'm still not too sure what to think about is this way in which I feel there's this uniqueness in terms of this community of belief of autonomous belief. So the modification of belief that is afforded by subjective destitution by moving through that existential truth process. And there's something there's something about it does something to subjectivity, but then the other piece is this piece of the sense that there's something like a community spirit, or the language you gave the other night was the partial object, or the way that I think about Jesus as this present absence that can uh, mediate a is the mediation of community spirit that then is, and then I think about it in terms of like language that is used as like a vehicle, that is a vehicle for emancipation. And wanting also to check that with this, like not desiring to liberate the other, but then as um because I guess my own or that's the confession that my own emancipation is tied up within that other dynamic, within the other relationship. That's kind of that's the word I use was that confession of the space that seems to be opening up of the vehicle through the social body. Uh, like a few years ago, I was thinking about this in terms of the way that like the next Buddha is spoken about as the Sangha. Like there's this, and then the community of loving fellowship, and like these, yeah, that paradox. Is it kind of clear?
That there's an other space opening up.
The other space opening up and having to do in some way in which the
It's community spirit, like the Buddha, not like the next Buddha is a Sangha.
yes, yes, yes. And but the way and putting that alongside this idea that the true leader of the community is not going to need the community. So the true subjectivity for participation within the community spirit does not need the community spirit. Like,
Yeah, that's kind of what I that's kind of what I see. That's that I see the same thing. And I think that what I'm trying to hold is like take for example that axiom of the next Buddha is a Sangha. I think the danger of that idea is again back to what how we started this discussion, where I was trying to articulate that the quote unquote father and son relationship is still necessary. It's just that, or like for example, let's take the elder and the child, or the Buddha and the I don't know what the name of the apprentice of the Buddha would be, but um, that spiritual hierarchy that we need to be able to contain that and respect that while at the same time opening up that space of genuine equality or genuine egalitarianness. Like I think that is the so in that sense it's just the accent like in regards to the triangle of triangles. So like in when I was saying like orthodoxy is the father, I'm not saying that orthodoxy doesn't have a position for the son or the Holy Spirit. It's just that the accent is towards the father. So I guess what I would say is like where we are now in the triangle of triangles is that the accent is towards the Holy Spirit.
yeah, yeah, I follow. Yeah, this I maybe my kind of thinking is towards the body now, because like this there's some way that the there's a because I understand this process of, say, reconciling the aggressive and the sexual drives as being something that must happen in this particular body, and that's connected to this existential truth process. It affords that nature of subjectivity. And then there's a steering, or there's the same. I mean, the example that comes to mind is the the unconscious Christianity of the liberal enactment. So there's the sense in which, yeah, I don't, because it's
The liberal is the liberal in regards to the unconscious Christianity is basically a father wound. What they're unconscious about is the aggressivity towards the father. And because there's an aggressivity towards the father, they actually don't know what to do with their sexual energy.
mm,
The aggressivity, I think the aggressivity is for Freud anyway, aggressivity is the deeper problem. And it's
Mm.
almost like if you solve the aggressivity problem, the sexual problem will take care of itself.
That's true to my experience. I I recognized a way in which I was uh, essentially like sexually addicted. I was addicted to that depth of that experience, and that was followed by a recognition of the or a recognition of the aggressive dynamics that I think were playing out around that realization that the because it was yeah I guess it I mean, or is that the other way around? I'm not sure. So yeah.
Our culture, I think, in regards to where we are in this cultural moment, it's we're at a moment where we have to reconcile with and the problem with the reconciliation with aggressivity is that it's something that has to be refreshed in every new generation, and every individual has to reconcile themselves. And of course, we as a civilization, as a culture, need to reconcile with the aggressivity, but it's a constant process. It refreshes itself through every new individual. The problem is that in the global context, and as the whole world gets closer together, there's so much otherness and there's so much plurality that comes into one network.
Mm,
And our capacity for violence increases with technology and with it's the double-edged sword of the technological advancement. Like, and this goes back to like everyone says this in like anthropology from evolutionary anthropological perspective is like, you invent fire, you can now cook in a way that you couldn't cook before. You can also burn down the tribe next to you,
yeah.
right? So it's always going to come with that double-edged sword, and as our technology increases, our capacity for warfare also increases. And so the stakes for mediating that aggressivity increases. I think practically speaking, the mistake that a lot of liberals make is that they think they can solve the issues of the global aggressivity, like say, for example, the war in Israel, Palestine, and they're obsessed with that, but they haven't reconciled their own aggressivity with the father wound or something first. So it's kind of like, you know, where I went with regards to finding like sort of my place politically speaking, or my, where my power was actually in the world. It was kind of in relationship to a pulling back from the global where I actually have no power towards a deeper reflection on my own aggressivity, and taking care of that before moving to higher levels or scales.
I think that this it would be nice to and it would connect with the kind of beginning curiosity in your personal process. Um I I'm curious about muted. Did you hear anything I said there?
I heard everything.
Oh, okay. So it muted somehow. The I'm curious in your personal process around those aggressive drives, and there's for it's because I'm thinking that from from the body. Yeah, if there's because I don't want to I can feel this insistence in myself around and just because of so like part of what I feel I can at least offer to my church community context is manners of embodied process and breath practice essentially, and the that I see as being potentially helpful, but there's an avoidance to that. There's an a weird, a strange avoidance to that manner of intervention. Um, and I don't know how much of this in me is this. that like a kind of proselytizing and the professional managerial like telling, like it's almost inevitable when I start gesturing towards the body, I get my speech gets towards this like this telling mode almost because it's like speaking, but I guess it has to speak from some kind of instructive uh and that's okay in the context of like a movement class or something, but this sense of the insisting importance of the body and the sense of being benefited by uh the bringing my attention to that in terms of these drives. um I I'm wondering how that has played out for you. I know you've had contact with Osho and you were uh, uh his practices and even psychedelics. I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm wondering your process in this direction. In it, yeah,
Well, there was a time in which, for me, I became quite critical of meditate, like I guess on a practice level, I became critical of more of the passive forms of meditation that didn't include within themselves the aggressivity. So that's kind of where I found the attraction to Osho's work, is that Osho's work seemed to well, he just called it dynamic meditation. But like just calling it what it is, dynamic meditation is just the meditation is like screaming and shaking and going crazy and like really building, and how hard it is to build spaces where you can just do that. Like I was doing it at the time I was living in an apartment complex where I'm sure other people could hear what I was doing. And like I know my roommates could hear what I was doing and they were like, quasi concerned. But the thing is that you do, I think, need those outlets. They're basically they're spaces for catharsis. And I think just building those spaces of catharsis, and I think in regards to the proselytizing, the telling mode, or the instructive or the authority mode, I think it speaks obviously to a desire inside of you. I think and it's not necessarily something that should be purely repressed. It probably teaches you that there's a part of you that would like to be in a teaching mode and would like to be a teacher one day, or are a teacher already in certain contexts. So I think that that should be cultivated because we do need teachers and we do need leaders, and those teachers and those leaders should be respected in certain contexts. I think, of course, where you have to be careful about that is, I would say, just the external imposition of such of emotion. Like the process I have tried to embody is, I build a container. Like, well, one, I have something that I've built up, which I know uh, is important for others to learn. And then I build the context where I see who comes. And then I teach in that context. But then outside of that context, outside of that context, I mean, I don't impose the materials that I teach in class on anyone. I teach that in class, like in class, this is the material I want to teach. Outside of class, I just act like I just speak like I think a lot has to do with just building the context and waiting for the people who are interested in that context to arrive. And in that sense, your patience and your faith solves the problem itself. But of course, the patience and the faith is that transmutation of the aggression, right? Which is actually something that you should want to get out of your teaching anyway, right? Like you don't want your teaching to be mediated by an unconscious aggression of like forcing the other person to believe something, right? Many contexts, of course, in which the point of the Christian atheism course is not everyone leaves with my view of philosophy. And there are many people who have come through Philosophy Portal or many publications in the anthologies where people are going their own direction.
yeah, that was thank you. Um, this that like I can reveal a kind of fantasy. This in your conversation with Mark Murphy and this this other jouissance that also you expressed in terms of this building and attracting, like the more feminine mode of drawing in, that I can, yeah, this the fantasy was something. It was this intimation, the sense that I got in the conversation of there being like a constructive project or construction project around the subtle body within a Christian atheist context. So inevitably, I like my imagining went almost to that kind of mapping of the Kabbalah or some low definition fantasy of that sense. Then I went uh, the retreat and I was sitting and as like the what you're speaking about here about the meditation that includes within itself in some way this aggressive drive and the sexual drive, which if that doesn't reach the meditate, then it's not clear what's happening in that context. But the experience was more the sense of, and it was coming from this diffused longing in myself for salvation through the means of meditation or whatever. So I was entering a meditative space in what I understand to be characteristically Christian, which is essentially it's not looking for anything, or it's a it's 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 a self-giving in which I experience the unfolding of a biblical motif and something like that Kabbalistic tree of life that was like directly inverse in terms of it being the structure that a forsakenness or a burning through reveals in its burning through, rather than being this like a construction that is then like mapped and given to the other and to be imposed and to have the other take some kind of conscious project to conform to. It was more this like this deepening of I would like I also think along these lines in terms of like a dying to oneself, dying to the and for me there's like specific practical I think it's the source of my insistence around this stuff, like practical experience, especially around experiences in meditation, around the suspension of breath, that without a cultural framing or an understanding is inevitably interrupted. And that interruption is the interruption of the process because it is the experience of dying. You think you if you don't if you don't have the trust that breath can suspend itself outside of yourself, you're not going to accept that movement of the body or that movement of the breath in your meditation. And so what I see is this continual interruption of meditative process because of the lack of a cultural framing for that process. So the way that it will come out and this is the way that I'm relating to what Mark Murphy is bringing forward. It's this sense of the depth and the danger of relating to this process in some kind of medicalized way. Like there's certain cultural constructs, especially in relation to the health and the destiny and say like the purpose of the body that that at some point interrupts the process of that uh the subtle body process finding and I say like some kind of completion or moving through those those moments in which inevitably there's going to be the reactive interruption of the process that's trying to unfold and the sense is that that's like culturally held, those are culturally held um dynamics. I appreciate the space that this has afforded in sharing that because it's something that I'm continually trying to articulate to myself of the sense of its importance, but it keeps getting captured by this like an almost impossible gesture to the body. And it was part of the like the real appeal within the material that was being brought forth with uh with with Mark Murphy and your conversation around the other the other Joyce.
Well, I mean, the body is in some sense an impossibility. Like the body is an impossibility we all struggle with. And in some ways, like if you take like a real look at the unconscious desires within our most intimate fantasies, I mean, they're impossible. Like you know what I mean? Like I mean, anyone who looks will find that. Or if you don't look, it'll find you, like so we all have to reconcile with the repetition of the body, and at the same time, as far as we know, the spirit only reveals itself through the body, right? And so we are this impossibility in some sense, and I think accepting that, like my principle is, and this is sort of like what I'm developing now, kind of trying to develop now in a philosophical sense, is that liberal culture, and maybe even modern culture in general, has tried to overcome impossibility, right? Like they think they can overcome impossibility towards immortality. Like in the most extreme, you have the transhumanist vision, or you could have, say, like, let's say, like a really unconscious, emancipatory political vision of some utopian secular state. I think that we need to include impossibility to open immortality, but it's not the immortality of our individual selves. It's the immortality of some sort of larger spiritual process, or Geist in a Hegelian sense, some world spiritual process. But that needs to include the impossibility of our bodies. So again, I think it's interesting to think about that in the context of the Trinitarian dialectic, because even like, for example, I was having a conversation with someone who is more leaning towards Eastern spiritual traditions. And I really do think that when I see this movement, especially among Westerners towards Eastern spiritual traditions, what they're trying to do is cobble together some ineffable big other. And in some way, like and what's to me what's being avoided is this absolute contradiction between the absolute reality and the particular body, right? Like, and that's kind of the Christ moment. Like, and that impossibility there, and the aggression and the sexual drives that issue from that, is really where the real work is. I'll just say very quickly that in regards to what you were saying about having this sort of, you said, I think something like a low level Kabbalistic idea coming from the conversation between myself and Mark Murphy, is that the principle that I think we need to get good at is letting our ideas follow the experience. And although ideas will come and they'll feel like these huge visions we need to actualize, we need to get good at cutting them down in some way, and being a little skeptical towards them. Like they'll happen, like it will happen. It happens to me. I'll get a big vision of like the way things should be, or the what I should do, like, but you gotta cut it down, and it has to be tested through the sieve of experience. And and also to follow experience. Like take, like, for example, like, let me give an example. Like this year I started the portal, but I didn't know what the portal would be, or what people would populate it, or what teachers would occupy it, or what concepts or themes would emerge internal to it. I had to follow, in some sense, the experience of that project, and sort of in the moment to moment tarrying with the project, see what happens. And then at the end of the year, I can think about what happened. And that's the big idea, and the big idea is, and it's retroactive, and then I have a new vantage point to look at the future, and I can learn some things and take some things with me. But that, it's like Kierkegaard said, like, you have to live into the future abyssally. You can only look back. You can only understand only understand your life looking backwards. But we're doomed to look forwards. So, but that's just the irony of our condition.
And it's this strange way in which these themes are coalescing in your project, like this honoring the spirit of the owl, of that reflective maturing
Yeah.
of what has happened in the looking back, But in some way now that's like it's it's the constructive project as well. It's the
Yeah. Like that's the weird thing. Like that's what I sometimes like I don't know how to make sense of within myself because I do like identify with the idea of the owl, with patience, with retroactivity, but I'm still constructing something, and I'm still forward facing,
mm,
and I'm still building, and so like I don't want to deny like there is a construction, there is a building, there is a future orientation,
mm,
but I want to emphasize how dizzying and disorienting and actually abyssal my experience of that is because like I literally don't know what's going to happen in January. Like I don't know, right? Like so like me personally at night, I'm with that.
mm,
Right? Like I
mm.
don't know. Like but I'm with that and I'm befriending that, right? Like that's my friend is that I don't know like what's happening in the next few months, but here I go.
Yeah, sure. I wish you incredible strength and energy for it. I mean, this another uh, really helpful adjustment that your thinking has made for me is exactly that experience first. And it's this reiteration of the death. Like this vision can come to be that big other that then dominates us in terms of our direction, and it's almost like this necessary coordinating function, but this repeated how like the rows of the cross of the present, like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sure, sure. I mean I mean that's it's a beautiful tie-in to basically the beginning impulse, which is this sense of this
Hmm.
trinitarian dialectic, this existential truth process, this crucifixion that is necessary and that modifies subjectivity, and that subjectivity can participate in a renewed and in a skillful, qualitative differently way with the signifiers and the big others that will persist and are
Yeah.
necessary between us and
I
amongst
think
us. And
I like to think of it as like my like what I get excited about is building an ecology of big others. So like what I see as the portal, like or like for example, like taking the Christian atheism course, the guest lecturers are Mark Murphy, Barry Taylor, Peter Rollins, Slavoj Žižek. To me, I'm putting those on as like that's the ecology of big others for this course, right? Like and I'm saying like these are like some of the here's some theological thinking that's happening now. Take what you like. There's these got, I'm kind of like vouching for them. Or like same or like the same thing in the portal, like when I'm designing a month in a certain way, for something like Thought Lab or the Edge, I'm kind of like saying, with the Edge, I'm kind of saying this person's on the edge of something, come and see if you like this edge, maybe it's something to explore for yourself or with Thought Lab, I'm trying to say, this person's been thinking about this for a few years now. Let's come and learn with this person, right? So, it's kind of like treating the big other in that way.
mm, mm, an ecology, yeah, ecology of big others. Yeah. Cadell, I'm conscious of the time. I'm I'm deeply appreciative for the time that you've given this. And the material itself, I hope, has reflected the depth and the import that it has had for me. And I deeply appreciate this philosophy portal space and what's happening there, and this I'm appreciating also the way in which you're in it, and I can see it. It's this. I mean, you're not knowing, but you you're appearing sufficiently big other productively. So don't yeah.
That's the weird thing, right? Like that's the weird thing is like, and I think the metaphor of the parent and the child is really helpful here. Is like sort of a last thought I'll sort of share is um, like for a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, right? Like the father or the mother must look like they know everything, right? But like the father and the mother obviously don't know everything, right? And it's kind of like I think it's kind of like that, like and it goes on through life in different structures.
Yeah, my most recent encounter with that was what Photis brought with the crypto. It was just
Yeah.
like a depth that I wasn't just no like such little space for grappling like yeah, young, but that's I mean that's the context in which that the anecdote arose. The spontaneous breathing that was initiated by some working and projection and unconscious metabolizing. It was around that material, precisely that, like uh, a something that, yeah, it's an interesting seed at the end there, the crypto. It's a some fantasy around money as well. Is there anything you would like to conclude with? Last word, a clap back.
No, I just wanna, I guess, yeah, no, thank you for the care of both the introduction, yeah, beautiful introduction and a beautiful series of reflections. I've really enjoyed this conversation and I've really appreciated getting to know you over the last year. It's been almost a year now. I think I first met you when you came into the Layman Pascal Magic and Psychoanalysis session at the Edge. And you've been a fantastic contributor to the portal. So thank you also for the energy you bring to that project.
Epic. It's close.